Come on, come on. Why aren't you cars where you should be?
Thomas is a tank engine who lives at a big station on the island of Sodor. He's a cheeky little engine with 6 small wheels, a short stumpy funnel, a short stumpy boiler, and a short stumpy dome. He's a fussy little engine, too, always pulling coaches about, ready for the big engines to take on long journeys. And when trains come in, he pulls the empty coaches away so that the big engines can go and rest. Thomas thinks no engine works as hard as he does. He loves playing tricks on them, including Gordon, the biggest and proudest engine of all. Thomas likes to tease Gordon with his whistle. "Wake up, lazy bones. Why don't you work hard like me?" One day, after pulling the big express, Gordon had arrived back at the sidings very tired. He was just going to sleep when Thomas came up in his cheeky way. "Wake up, lazy bones. Do some hard work for a change. You can't catch me." And off he ran, laughing. Instead of going to sleep again, Gordon thought how he could get back at Thomas. Edward worked hard all day. The coaches thought he was very kind, and the driver was very pleased. "I'm going out again tomorrow," Edward told the other engines that night. "What do you think of that?" But he didn't hear what they thought, for he was so tired and happy that he fell asleep at once. Next morning, Edward woke up to find nothing had changed. Gordon was still boasting. "You watch me, little Edward, as I rush through with the express. That will be a splendid sight for you." When Henry had got up steam, he puffed out. He was dirty and covered with cobwebs. "Oh, I'm stiff, he groaned. "Have a run to ease your joints and find a turntable," said Sir Topham Hatt. When Henry came back, he felt much better. Then they coupled him up. "Beep, beep," said Edward. "I'm ready." "Beep, beep, beep," said Henry. "So am I. Pull hard, we'll do it. Pull hard, we'll do it." They puffed together. "We've done it together, we've done it together," said Edward and Henry. "You've done it, hooray! You've done it, hooray!" sang the coaches. Everyone was excited. Sir Topham Hatt leaned out of the window to wave at Edward and Henry. But the train was going so fast that his hat blew off into a field where a goat ate it for tea. They never stopped till they came to the station at the end of the line. Next morning, Edward and Thomas asked their drivers, and when they said yes, Thomas ran off happily to find freight cars. Now, the freight cars are silly and noisy. They talk a lot and don't attend to what they are doing. And I'm sorry to say, they play tricks on an engine who is not used to them. Edward knew all about the freight cars. He warned Thomas to be careful, but Thomas was too excited to listen. The shunter fastened the coupling, and when the signal dropped, Thomas was ready. The conductor blew his whistle. Beep, beep, answered Thomas, and started off. Just then, the conductor blew his whistle, and James thought they had better go. Go on, he puffed to Edward. Don't push, replied Edward. The coaches were grumbling too. Don't go so fast, don't go so fast. But James didn't listen. When at last they stopped at the next station, 2 coaches were beyond the platform. They had to go back to let the passengers out. But no one seemed to know about Sir Topham's new hat, so James felt happier. One day, he stopped as usual to take in water at the station by the river. Out of order. Bother, said Thomas. I'm thirsty. Never mind, said his driver. We'll get some water from the river. They found a bucket and some rope and went to the bridge. Then the driver let the bucket down to the water. The bucket was old and had 5 holes, so they had to fill it, pull it up, and empty it into Thomas's tank as quickly as they could, several times over. They finished at last. That's good, puffed Thomas, and Annie and Clarabelle ran happily behind. Thomas never could go fast at first, and Bertie drew in front. Why don't you go fast? Why don't you go fast? Called Annie and Clarabelle. Wait and see, hissed Thomas. He's a long way ahead, they wailed. But Thomas didn't mind. He'd remembered the level crossing. There was Bertie fuming at the gates while they sailed gaily through. Goodbye, Bertie, called Thomas. After that, the road left the railway so they couldn't see Bertie. We'll see about that, said Sir Topham Hatt. No engine on my railway is too important for small jobs. And he hurried away to find Edward. The yard has never been the same since Thomas left to run his branch line, he thought sadly. Edward was shunting. Leave those freight cars, please, Edward, said Sir Topham Hatt. I want you to push coaches for me in the yard. Thank you, sir. That will be a nice change. That's a good engine. Off you go, then. So Edward found coaches for the 3 engines, and that day the trains ran as usual. After a great deal of shunting, Percy was waiting for the signalman to set the switch so he could get back to the yard. Percy was being rather careless and not paying attention. Edward had warned Percy, be careful on the main line, whistle to the signalman that you were there. But Percy didn't remember to whistle, and so the busy signalman forgot him. Percy waited and waited. The switch was still against him, so he couldn't move. Then he looked along the main line. Beep, beep! He whistled in horror, for rushing straight toward him was Gordon with the express. Oh! Groaned Gordon. Get out of my way! Percy opened his eyes. Gordon had stopped with Percy's buffers just a few inches from his own. Henry was ready at 5 o'clock. There was snow and frost. Men hustled and shouted, loading up the crates of fish. The last door banged, the guard showed his green lamp, and the flying kipper was ready to go. Come on, don't be silly, puffed Henry to the freight cars. The cars shuddered and groaned. Trickety-trock, all right. That's better, puffed Henry. Later, Henry stopped at Edward's station. "Hello, Henry," said Edward. "You look splendid. I was pleased to hear your happy whistle yesterday." "Thank you, Edward," smiled Henry. "Shh! Can you hear something?" "It sounds like Gordon," said Edward, "and it ought to be Gordon. But Gordon never whistled like that." It was Gordon. He came rushing down the hill at a tremendous rate. He didn't look at Henry, and he didn't look at Edward. He screamed straight through the station and disappeared. "Well," said Edward. "It isn't wrong," chuckled Henry, "but we just don't do it." And he told Edward what Gordon had said. Starting with only a few, he picked up more and more cars at each station till he had a long train. At first, the freight cars behaved well, but James bumped them so crossly that they were determined to get back at him. Presently, they approached the top of Gordon's Hill. Heavy freight trains halt here to set their brakes. James had had an accident with cars before and should have remembered this. "Wait, James, wait," said the driver, but James wouldn't wait. He was too busy thinking what he would say to Toby when they next met. The freight car's chance had come. "Hurrah! Hurrah!" they laughed, and banging their buffers, they pushed him down the hill. "On! On!" yelled the cars. "I've got to stop! I've got to stop!" groaned James. Disaster lay ahead. Edward felt a jerk, but didn't take much notice. He was used to cattle cars. "Bother those cars," he thought. "Why can't they come quietly?" He was at the next station before either he or his driver realized what had happened. When Gordon and Henry heard about the accident, they laughed and boasted. "Fancy allowing cows to break your train. They wouldn't dare do that to us. We'd show them." Old Toby was cross. "Edward is impossible," he grumbled to the others. "He clanks about like a lot of old iron, and he is so slow, he makes us wait." Thomas and Percy were indignant. "Old iron? Slow? Why, Edward could beat you in a race any day." "Really," said James, "I should like to see him do it." Next morning, James's driver was suddenly taken ill. He could hardly stand, so the fireman uncoupled James ready for shunting. James was impatient. Suddenly, the signalman shouted. There was James puffing away down the line. "Stay in the shed today, James. Sir Topham Hatt will come and see you." "Ah," thought James, "Sir Topham Hatt knows I'm a fine engine. He wants me to pull a special train." James's driver and fireman could not make him move. The other engines grumbled dreadfully. They had to do James's work as well as their own. At last, the inspector arrived. "Show a wheel, James. You can't stay here all day." "Sir Topham Hatt told me to stay here. He sent a message this morning." "He did not. How could he? He's away for a week." Thomas the tank engine was ill. Workmen had tried to make him better, but it was no use. "Edward must take you to the works," said Sir Topham Hatt. Thomas felt very miserable. Then Sir Topham Hatt spoke to Duck. "I want you to help Percy and Toby while Thomas is away." Duck was delighted. He already knew Percy and soon made friends with Toby and Bertie. Terence the tractor gave him a big welcome, too. "Take care of Thomas's coaches," he advised. "He's sure to miss them while he's away." The cars were silly, heavy, and noisy. The two engines had to work hard, pushing and pulling all afternoon. At last, they reached the top of the hill. "Goodbye," whistled Duck, and rolled gently over the crossing to the other line. Duck loved coasting down the hill, running easily with the wind whistling past. Suddenly, it was a conductor's warning whistle. "Hurrah! Hurrah! Hurrah!" laughed the cars. "We've broken away! We've broken away! Chase him! Bump him! Throw him off the rails!" they yelled. "Hurry, Duck, hurry," said the driver. They raced through Edward Station, but the cars were catching up. Come along," he panted to the coaches. Annie and Clarabelle did their best, but Thomas soon found that he couldn't save much time. Suddenly, Thomas saw Bertie ahead. His radiator was steaming. "What's the matter?" asked Thomas. "You should be at the station by now. You're late." "I feel dreadful," moaned Bertie. "All upset inside, and driver says he can't make me better." "Thank goodness you're late, too. Can you take my passengers, please? They'll never get home otherwise." "Of course," agreed Thomas. He now felt sorry for Bertie and promised to get help at the next station. Thomas set off again. Already he felt much more cheerful, and Bertie's passengers, traveling in Annie and Clarabelle, all reached home safely. Donald and Douglas are twins and had arrived from Scotland to help Sir Topham Hatt, but only one engine had been expected. The twins meant well, but did cause confusion. Sir Topham Hatt had given them numbers, Donald 9 and Douglas 10, but he was still planning to send one engine home. There was a brake van in the yard that had taken a dislike to Douglas. Things always went wrong when he had to take it out. His trains were late, and he was blamed. Douglas began to worry. Donald, his twin, was angry. "You're a muckle nuisance," said Donald. "It's to leave you behind I be wanting." "You can't," said the brake van. "I'm essential." "Ah, are you?" Donald burst out. "You're nothing but a screeching and a noise when all's said and done. Spite doggy, would you? Take that!" "Oh! Oh!" cried the van. "There's more coming should you misbehave." Daisy, the diesel rail car's work in the countryside, was full of surprises. But she was frightened of bulls and cows, and she remained very lazy and stubborn. One day, Toby brought Henrietta to the station where Percy was grumpily shunting. "Hello, Percy. I see Daisy's left the milk behind again." "I'll have to make a special journey with it, I suppose." "Anyone would think I'd nothing to do," grumbled Percy. "Tell you what," replied Toby, "I'll take the milk. You fetch my freight cars." Thomas's branch line is important, and so is Edward's. But their track and bridges are not so strong as those on the main line. Sir Topham Hatt does not allow the heavier main line engines like Gordon to run on them. But one day, the way Gordon was talking, you would have thought Sir Topham Hatt had given this order for quite another reason. "It's not fair," grumbled Gordon. "What isn't fair?" asked Edward. "Letting branch line diesels pull main line trains." "Never mind, Gordon. I'm sure Boko will let you pull his freight cars sometimes." "Thomas didn't believe in your ghost," said Percy next morning. His driver laughed. "Neither do I. It was only a pretend ghost story." Percy was disappointed. That evening, he came back from the harbor. Percy knew where he was, even in the dark. Crow's Farm Crossing. We shan't be long now. He liked running at night. The rails hummed and the signal light shone green. But a broken cartload of lime lay ahead. Sam the farmer had just gone for help. Even so, Sir Topham Hatt decided that Gordon needed a rest. "James shall do your work," he said kindly. James was delighted. He liked to show off his smart red paint and was determined to be as fast as Gordon. "You know, little Toby," he boasted, "I'm an important engine. Everyone knows it. I'm as regular as clockwork. Never late, always on time. That's me." "Says you," replied Toby. Just then Sir Topham Hatt arrived. "Your parts are worn, Toby, so you must go to the works to be mended." "Can I take Henrietta, sir?"
"Huh," said Gordon. "Who cares? A lot of fuss about nothing, if you ask me."
And he steamed away. Later that night, the engines found that the visitor wasn't conceited at all. He enjoyed talking to the other engines till long after the stars came out. He left early next morning. Gordon was still complaining.
"Good riddance," he grumbled, "chattering all night. Who is he, anyway?"
"Duck told you," replied Thomas. "He's famous."
"As famous as me? Nonsense."
"He's famouser than you. He went 100 miles an hour before you were even thought of." Percy woke up with a start. "Help!" cried Percy. "I'm not going to open my eyes until my driver comes." Next morning, the switches were mended and Percy puffed back to the junction. Gordon was just about to leave with the express. "You'll never guess what I saw last night." Gordon was in no mood for puzzles.
"I'm a busy engine. I don't have time for your games."
"I've seen a huge dragon. It was covered in lights." Gordon snorted.
"You've been in the sun too long. Your dome has cracked."
Henry could remember the day long ago when he and Toby brought some new trees to be planted, and Terence and Trevor helped haul them into place. Now he could see the trees growing amongst the others on the hillside. Henry always felt better for being here. He couldn't really explain why, but his driver understood. "It's peaceful," he said to Henry. But one night, everything changed. The engines were resting in the shed. "Listen," said Thomas. "Can you hear a strange whistling sound?" Some of James's cars were coupled behind Thomas, and he steamed away to the quarry. The cars were still cross. "We couldn't pay James back for bumping us, so we'll play tricks on Thomas instead. One engine is as good as another." But Thomas didn't hear them. He collected all the stone from the quarry and set off back to the junction. Danger lay ahead. "Now for our plan," giggled the cars. "Go faster, go faster." They pushed Thomas over the switches. "Slow down," called Thomas's driver, and applied the brakes. Poor Thomas stood dazed and surprised in a muddy pond as a toad eyed him suspiciously. "Bust my buffers," muttered Thomas. "The day started so well, too." James didn't like being told what to do by a diesel, and he buzzed away.
"Goodbye, Trevor,"
called Boko, and set off to see Duck at the next station. Bill and Ben, the tank engine twins, were busy arranging cars, but they scampered off when they saw Boko.
"I remember the first time I met those two," laughed Boko. "They nearly made my eyes pop out. Edward soon put a stop to their games."
"Edward is the only one who can keep Bill and Ben in order," chuckled Duck. "I sometimes call them the Bees."
"A good name," replied Boko. They're terrors when they start buzzing around. "Pah," said Gordon. "What's this? Educating Gordon Day? First James, now you, Duck. Big engines have big needs. Little engines are just annoying."
Don't say I didn't warn you, laughed Duck. Later, Gordon steamed into the yard at the big station.
"That's what I need,"
Exclaimed Gordon. There, emerging out of the sheds, were two shiny tenders.
"Now, if I had two tenders," said Gordon, "I wouldn't need to stop so often, and I wouldn't have to listen to silly little engines."
"Those tenders belong to a visitor," replied his driver. The engines found work difficult. Some had to help clear snow from the track, and workmen hacked away at the frozen banks of ice. Thomas and Percy were collecting important mail for Thanksgiving. "Driver says there's lots of mail for the village," said Thomas. "I'll need an extra car for it all." Percy was feeling left out. "It's not fair. You're not leaving any mail for me." But Percy's chance had come. "There's been a change of plan," said Thomas's driver. "Sir Topham Hatt needs us at the big station. Percy, you are to take Thomas's train to the village." Percy was delighted, but Thomas was sad.
Duke? Stuttered Toby. You mean our hero?
A large painting of Duke hung in the engine shed. "The very same," said Thomas. "Driver told me the story. Listen." And this is the story Thomas told them. Long ago, when Peter Sam was still called Stuart and Sir Handel Falcon, they worked with Duke on his old railway, but Falcon still had a lot to learn. The manager came to see him.
Falcon, I'm pleased with your work so far. Now you must learn a difficult part of the line. We call it the mountain road.
Falcon was excited. "Yes, please, sir."
So tomorrow, when you have a new coat of paint, you will go on it. Duke will explain everything.
"I've been sent here for a rest," he sighed. "I was put in this shed so that I could see everything and not be lonely. But I do miss Rheneas. He's going to be mended. I wish I could be mended too and pull coaches again." Just then, some workmen arrived.
We're going to take you to the works now, Edward. Come along. Goodbye, Skarloey. Your railway's a lovely line.
"Oh, it is, it is. You've cheered me up, Edward. Goodbye." Meanwhile, Sir Handel was having trouble with some coaches. He tried to be kind, but the coaches didn't trust him. They were awkward and rude. Skarloey wasn't sleepy anymore. "What? When?" "Soon. Daddy told me. I'm going now," she said. "Nancy, stop! Do I really look nice? Please polish me again." "Now who's an old fusspot?" laughed Nancy and set to work once more. Duncan was jealous.
Aren't you going to polish me too?
"Sorry, not today. I'm going now. I'm helping the refreshment lady this afternoon. We must get the ice cream ready for the passengers." "Never mind, Duncan." But Duncan did mind.
It isn't fair, he complained. Peter Sam gets a special funnel, Sir Handel gets special wheels, passengers get ice cream, but I'm not even polished. It's not your fault, but Sir Topham Hatt should scrap you and get engines like me. A fill of oil, a touch on the starter, and I'm off. No bother, no waiting. They have to fuss round you for hours before you're ready. The engines were furious. Next morning, they held an indignation meeting round the turntable. Disgraceful. Disgusting. Despicable. To say such things to us, cried Donald and Douglas. It's to teach them a lesson we'd be wanting. Now, how do we do it? Their chance came sooner than expected. Thomas the Tank Engine puffed happily along his branch line with Annie and Clarabelle. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting on the platform. He looked at his watch. Well done, Thomas. You are right on time and really reliable. Thank you, sir, whistled Thomas. Ooh, right on time and really reliable, hummed the coaches.
But the big engines were not feeling cheerful at all. "Where's Percy?" mumbled Henry. "He's supposed to fetch our coaches." "We get no rest," complained James. He edged angrily onto the turntable and spoke rudely to Henry. "Come on, come on. Why aren't you cars where you should be?" "There's no engine, and we can only go where we're put," shouted the cars. "You're in the wrong place, not us." When Percy arrived, Bulstrode was sulking and the cars were crosser still. "Our stone is for Bulstrode. Please put us in a siding so that we can load him up and be rid of him." But the cars were being careless. As Percy was lining them up, they burst through some buffers. "Help! Help!" they wailed. But it was too late. Henry waited impatiently by the quayside as Duck shunted them into position. Thomas puffed by with the mail train. "Hello, Duck. Going fishing? I'd take care if I were you." "Why?" huffed Duck. "Well, for one thing," puffed Thomas, remembering his own experience, "if fish get into an engine's boiler, they always cause trouble. And for another, fish can be awfully smelly. And I know what I'm talking about. Good night." Edward steamed in. "Beep! The Queen is here!" Then Gordon whistled as he approached the station. Everyone knew that sound. The Queen's train glided into the station. Gordon was spotless and his brass shone brightly. Sir Topham Hatt stood to attention. "Welcome, ma'am." The Queen thanked him for a splendid run and asked to see all the engines. "Beep, beep," whistled Toby and Percy. "Shh," hissed Henry and James. But Toby and Percy didn't care. "3 cheers for the Queen!" "Beep, beep," whistled the engines. When it was time to leave, the Queen spoke specially to Thomas, who fetched her coaches. Then to Edward. And finally to Gordon, who took her away. No engines ever felt prouder than those on Sir Topham Hatt's railway.